Can you hear me? Okay, great. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be on this panel. I think the who's who of radio are on this one stage. So I think if you need answers to what's going to happen to radio today or in the future, I think you have the right voices here. Right? I think my journey with radio actually started in 2006 when I joined at that point of time Big FM. And we had to launch at that point of time India's largest FM network. I think that was my first experience with a startup. And what is really interesting, since I also have the CEO of Mango FM here, something that nobody knows. The original name of Big FM was actually Mango FM, right? And we had created everything, the logo, the stationality, everything. And then somebody within the then Anil Ambani Reliance group wrote a letter to the chairman saying that, you're launching your first broadcasting medium. So you need to think big. And it has to be something bigger than Mango. And therefore, that's how the name Big was actually born. And eventually, we launched the radio station. We changed everything. We changed the logo. We changed the stationality in 21 days. And we had to launch it on time because we were given no additional time. So as you can see, radio is a really exciting medium. It hasn't changed at all. And the craziness continues. But what I'm going to start off with is really setting the context. So I'm going to ask, let's start with Abe. Abe, since we come from Big FM. Look, let's start from where we are today with radio, right? So, given your experience with the medium, what do you think has changed in the last 5 years?
Let me look at it from how the clients see radio. One of the biggest changes we see is that the biggest markets where ad second-ages are played out is not any of the metros, it's Nagpur, followed by Indore, followed by Surat, followed by Jaipur, and so on and so forth. So very clearly the metro, radio is and always will be a local medium. Unfortunately, when radio was launched, we had to depend on the national clients, and at that time we were probably 80% national and 20% local advertising. Today it's probably 50-50, but the difference is even the national advertisers are buying radio locally. So the true intrinsic value of radio is coming out because now it's been considered a local medium with high reach and high impact. So I think that's been a big shift in terms of how radio is bought. And I'm assuming that the advertisers have their own reasons for doing this in terms of they know where their growth markets are, and we all know India's growth is coming from the tier 2, tier 3 markets, and therefore their own in-house research, I know measurement of all broadcast media are suspect, and they have their valid reasons for why they get onto these markets more than the others. Second shift is also in terms of the growth of digital, right? And one of the biggest strengths of radio is that it easily integrates with all other media, right? So it's no longer brand versus performance, it's brand and performance. So it's not radio versus digital, but radio and digital. And some of us at times forget that, radio is not the exciting stuff, let me do more digital innovations. But the fact is, radio continues to grow. Pure radio continues to grow in volume in every market. It's at different, obviously, rates of growth. But this whole digital amplification and on-ground amplification has opened an entirely new revenue stream. So the way we look at it is that let's focus on strengthening radio per se, and let's also go after the other revenue streams. Today it's probably 25% of what we do, but looks like it's growing faster.
Yeah. So while you've given us a business perspective, let me bring Asit in. Asit, you've been with Radio City for a while now, and you've seen stations across the country. Who do you think among audiences, what has changed with audiences? Have there been segments that have stayed loyal with radio? Have some segments moved out? What's your experience?
So, I'll look at it from the consumer perspective. I think, like like rightly Abe has answered that, radio is evolving into newer formats, newer platforms, and I would believe radio is now actually connecting into newer audiences, and that's where digital comes into play. So to answer your question, I think, apart from being hyper-local and language-first kind of a situation for Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, the relevance of radio continues to be there. Specifically in the larger markets or the metro markets, there is a slight shift which is happening, and that's where I think we as radio players are trying to, straddle multiple platforms to engage with the same audience. So, the younger audiences perhaps are a little not so radio savvy, if I may use the word radio, but I think radio players have found an innovative way of reaching out to those audiences through digital.
Okay, great. Ramesh, I mean, look, I think one of the things I remember when we always spoke about radio was its ability to deliver hyper-local marketing, right? And do you think in a world where, like even Abe was saying, digital has now become so omnipresent, is radio losing its edge when it comes to a platform for hyperlocal marketing?
Not really. From what Abe said earlier as well, the markets that are growing are the ones that are much more hyperlocal than the markets that look for national advertising and national campaigns. So it's not losing out on hyperlocal. I think it's losing out much more because I think that creativity that we saw, Josie present is probably missing a little bit, or clients don't have the patience with that kind of creativity. So if we can get more creative, we can go back to what we were in radio many years ago and bring that creativity back into this and bring it along with, plus digital, plus, other mediums. You'll probably get radio growing again and being as hyperlocal as it used to be earlier. I think metro markets, it'll struggle with being hyperlocal, but certainly the smaller markets, smaller towns, tier 2, tier 3, and now the government is planning to auction licenses for another 150 towns. I'm sure those markets will be the real hyperlocal markets where people can actually listen to local advertising and connect locally with that thing.
So Vanita, sitting on the other side of the table, having to evaluate multimedia channels, and look, budgets are not growing, right? Budgets are just, they're all shrinking. So from an agency perspective, how are you and your team looking at radio? What has changed, let's say, over the last 5 years?
So I think radio always, even before 5 years, if you really ask me, as from the media side, has always been innovation-led more than just scale and reach-led. And today what has happened is that innovation, like he was pointing out, that is not as high, the quotient, and also probably the clients are looking at innovation in the top metros, and there they feel that it may not stand out because there's so much clutter, there's so much fragmentation, and I think clients want scale along with innovation, and the scale is not as much now, and people are very conscious of the fact that digital is the way to go, and having said that radio stations are digital very much, they are more open to YouTube and other modalities, and for that matter Spotify. So those kind of things are coming up more for metros. I agree totally with smaller markets. It's easier because we know that that's more community, more local. So it helps there, it becomes easier. It's also the efficiencies get better in smaller markets.
Let me get Manoj in. Manoj, I mean, coming back to this entire perspective of, hyperlocal, and the fact that, let's say you're operating a radio network in one part of the country. So in your mind, when it comes to what advertisers are looking for, so Vanita spoke about innovation, and we've heard this before, that come to radio, let's do an innovation, maybe get an award, versus really using radio networks to drive specific business KPIs. What's your experience been?
So I'll take off from where Abe said that a lot of it is becoming retail advertising now. So retailers, the very fact that retailers keep coming back to radio, and retailers look more for footfalls, more for actual sales than brand building. And if they keep coming back, it clearly means that radio is working. That's a very important point. Second, I think radio stations have equipped ourselves over the last few years to go outside the station. So not only are we using digital, we also use on-ground quite effectively. So while digital can give you reach, if any brand wants relevance beyond reach, it has to come to radio, because radio has those trusted voices, one. Second, the same trusted voices also go out into the field. and then they get more relevant. So that's why hyperlocal works better on radio than on digital. So again, to say digital will give you the reach, but the relevant reach is from radio.
You made an important point about retail versus national advertisers. So what would be the share of spend of investments coming from retail versus national? I mean, anyone?
For me,
Yeah?
or Abe
I
said
mean, for
it's
you, it
50.
would be good to hear from a regional perspective and then a national network.
Yeah, for me it's about 70% is still retail and 30% is corporate.
Or corporate. And Ashit, Abe, from your
I
perspective?
think for us, because we have a lesser number of stations, it will be 60-40. 60 comes from retail and 40 comes from national.
Okay.
Yeah,
It has changed over the last 3-4 years now.
it's probably between 60-40 to 50-50.
Wow.
There's a
And
lot
Ramesh,
of-
for you?
It's more for our kind of markets. We're basically in the metro markets.
That's right.
So it's much more corporate driven than retail driven.
That's right. So for larger networks, you're seeing retail participation is definitely changing. It's becoming much, much larger. Great. Okay, let me move on to the second point of discussion we wanted to have, which is really going deeper into the topic is, reinventing radio in a way, in a very digital first ecosystem where a lot of audiences are becoming digital first. Let me start with Amit. Amit, do you think the battle, given the fact that audios now has many forms, right? You have podcasts, you have video shows. You have shows on YouTube which are largely podcasts, but they're just being short, right? It's still a conversation. You could hear that conversation even if you didn't have the video, but the video maybe adds a little more element to it. It also ties into consumer behavior of 500 million plus consumers watching YouTube, right? So in your mind, is the battle there? Is there a battle firstly between FM and digital? Is there a battle?
I don't think so. I think it's an evolution for both. I think I've always believed media doesn't die, it just evolves, right? I mean, like, no matter what kind of form you're looking at, it is just a question of evolution. In this case, I think radio is evolving to get closer to digital in many ways. We started as an audio-only network. We are now a YouTube-first podcasting network because YouTube is where the primary audience is. But that doesn't change the tenor of the shows we do, right? I mean, the shows that we have and the conversations that are occurring on those shows were the same ones that occurred when we started 10 years ago. So I don't think that, I just think that there are evolutions. I don't think there's competitiveness in that sense, other than budgets, obviously. Everybody is trying to, fighting for the same pie. But other than that, I don't think that it is a existential threat to either.
So you said an interesting thing, right? You said that you started off as an audio medium with radio, but now we've actually started focusing on YouTube, right? So does that, in a way, actually answer the question? The fact is that even from an audio perspective, a lot of the effort in content creation is moving towards video platforms versus staying in the core of FM, which is a radio platform.
So
which is
I
an audio
think
platform.
the challenge with podcasting and audio, right, is there's a technological challenge, there's a reach challenge, right? I mean, like, when we're talking about radio reach, anybody can turn a button on in a car or a house or what have you, and you can listen. Podcast is more intent driven. That leads to lower broad numbers, right? Like, so the best shows that we've done, have done maybe 150, 250,000 downloads per episode is like the absolute top of it, right? That doesn't move the needle from a reach perspective when you compare it to something like radio. And so that, I think, is the kind of reason that YouTube becomes a more viable this. And the technical aspect of it is also just like, there's automatic insertion in advertising that you get via podcasting, right? When you're doing audio first. YouTube does not allow that. YouTube means you hard burn. So that changes the sales mechanism. I think we find advertisers and brands more comfortable with YouTube than they are with all these varied podcasting apps that you might use, right? You have to get a Spotify dashboard, and you have to get a YouTube dashboard, and you have to get a hosting dashboard. And then you have to convince them that, oh no, Triton is an internationally well-known company who we are hosting with, so they have good metrics in terms of what a listen is. So there are, I think those challenges exist, which YouTube kind of alleviates for us.
Okay. Ramesh, since your network is largely in metros, where the demand for, on-demand content is going up, OTT consumption, especially subscription-driven, is largely led still in the metros. So from your audience's perspective, when you look at this behavior, do you think it's, in a way, therefore, forcing you to change the way you look at content and create formats or create content engagement, which kind of mimics what this audience is looking for?
Absolutely agree. So what we've done is we've looked at our asset as the people, right? And people in the organization don't need to be just radio creators. They need to be podcasters, they need to be YouTube creators, they need to be on-ground, activation people or on-ground event people. And we made sure that every one of our, erstwhile RJs, they were all redesignated content creators. The content, the programming heads, the erstwhile, the radio language where they looked after programming, today they're all content heads. And none of them, not one person in the organization today is just a radio creator. At the end of the day, we were tackling this dichotomy where people used to come to work, do radio, and go back home and create video. We said, why do you need to do that? You come to office, do radio, do video, and make sure that we, talk to audiences, multi-format, multi-platform, multimedia, and you don't need to look at yourself as just a radio organization. It's radio plus, 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 plus. And last year we also went into events, saying that, it's an adjacency to the core radio, and therefore, it makes sense for us to be in that business as well. So how do you build a business for the future, not just looking at it single medium, single platform, or, the one way of looking at it like we used to 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We need to be agile and look at it from a different perspective, and that's really what we've been trying to do. And especially true in metros, because the metro audiences have evolved far more than other audiences, and I think it's very important to.
Let me get Abe into the conversation. Abe, you obviously are running a much larger network. You're talking to large metros, you're talking to small town India. So while Ramesh spoke about what's happening in metros and how they've changed their overall outlook towards content, what are given the fact that digital has now reached the furthest corners of urban and rural India, how is it forcing changes in the way you all are looking at content?
So, see, firstly, I think if you look at it at content, all these are platforms, right? So you're creating content that plays through the FM. You're creating content that can get amplified on digital. We are working with a lot of micro and nano influencers at a local level. Yeah, we are building communities and cohorts that can be that can align with brand objectives. So and I think most of us have actually become solution creators, right? We are looking at providing brand solutions for the marketing challenges of our clients. And increasingly, more and more clients are asking for a solution rather than just a on-air spot or even an on-air integration. So the approach is very clearly that build these cohorts, build these communities which can be monetizable. And therefore, like we have a very large community of what we call mom influencers, right? So brands which are trying to reach out to moms, we can readily go and offer that to them. Now with Big Live, what we've done is that this is an attempt to actually enable our local businesses, because that's our bread and butter, right? We are not really, we can't really depend on the big national advertisers. For rightly or wrongly, they've kind of moved completely onto performance. I think they'll come back, but the point is, so for these, what we are trying to do is build really local, deep content that can create communities, and then enable the local businesses to kind of ride on that. So that's the attempt at Big Live. We've just launched it last week, and it's geographically very wide, and it's content-wise very deep. So we've taken the top 10 advertiser categories. I'm sorry to say that, but I've taken those, and then we're building deep content verticals on that. And that, we believe, will start getting us traction, which in turn can eventually be monetized. Interesting.
So Vanita, look, there seems to be a lot happening in the radio space. Content seems to be evolving. Solutions seem to be changing completely. And therefore, from an agency point of view, when you're looking at radio as a medium, and you're comparing it with, let's say, digital, since we're talking about that, do you think there's a lag between the fact that because radio lacks measurement, it puts it at a serious disadvantage?
I don't think so, because like Abe rightly said, every broadcast medium has got that problem. It's not that television or digital is measured beautifully or sacredly, as we would say. So I don't think that's the issue at all.
Then why is only 3% of the addicts going behind radio? There's no problem.
Well, there is a reach that is there, right? So it is following the reach and scale. At one time, many years ago, digital, when it was not so huge, it's now come ahead of TV also. But when it was very low, then that time digital used to be looked at for innovation. Digital used to be like, Acha, let's do something tick box and do something interesting in digital, right? So that was when the scale was not high, but the scale has come up and now digital has taken the pie. So radio scale and reach, it's not just about the numbers that are measured wrongly or rightly. Directionally, it is still lower than the other mediums. And you have to buy local wise, right? You can't buy like overall. You'll have to patch up each market, and each market may require something differently. So that's how we look at it.
Just to add, and Vanita and Andy, you can probably help us. From what I can see, the Google algorithm can now differentiate between a T-series audience and a highly focused cohort, right? And it's not just the numbers, but it's also saying, hey, there's better chance of engagement if I serve this ad to this audience rather than to a more generic, I'm taking the T-series because it's the largest audience. So if the algo has gone there, then is it only reach that matters, or isn't it the engagement and the...
So yeah, and I think engagement is important for smaller communities and areas, but again, given that we have other options, then it becomes like a comparison with Spotify straight away, because Spotify has got scale as well in terms of the way they talk, the way they come to us and they tell us. So that becomes like the second competition then, yeah.
Amit, given the format that you are working with, while it's audio, but you're talking about your presence on YouTube now. So from a monetization perspective, what are some of the challenges you face when you're talking to, let's say, potential advertisers?
So I think like one of the big differences we found between our business and radio at large, right, is we've been very unsuccessful with the idea of inventory sales, right? I have some of the longest running podcasts in the country. Cyrus's podcast has been going on for over 10 years right now. We have finance podcasts, advertising podcasts, all running for long periods of time. But we're not selling ads in content as much. Where we are winding up, where our revenue is primarily coming from is either through white label content, or it is through building podcast, strategies for brands and that kind of activity, which I think is very different in some ways, because I think while radio does a great deal of branded work, they are primarily an inventory medium, right? And so I think that also is a contrast between how we approach this and I think how they approach this. And that again is because that is also why YouTube becomes extremely important, right? We did something, we did an activity just last week released, which got 500,000 YouTube organic views. That is something that can only happen on YouTube. That would never happen on any audio platform. So, which is why the digital part of that becomes.
Could you give the audience an example of a white label content, for example, you've created for a brand?
Sure. We've done a show for ICICI Mutual Fund called Finance Flashback. The idea is to talk about financial concepts by looking at history, right? So how the Silk Road is something that you can look at, the idea of diversification of investment. Silk Road grew because there was diversification of goods around that, right? So you look at kind of creating those kinds of parallels or something like that.
Manoj, when it comes to, let's say, a very regional market that you're operating in, and you have a large retail base of customers, right? So again, from a content solutions perspective, how are you doing it differently in any form?
I'll just add something to what he said, just to give some perspective on numbers. The entire online audio gets from advertisements about 100 to 140 crores only, whereas the radio industry is about 2,500 crores. And the rest of the money the online audio earns is from subscriptions and white label stuff, which is about 600 crores. Put together, it's about 800 crores, and our industry is 2,500 crores. It could also mean more trust on our medium. It could mean that. Okay, to answer your question, what do we do differently for clients? It's the same. I mean, a regional brand is not very different from a national brand. All clients look for solutions. All clients want touch points. All clients, if there's an auto major, if there's an auto client, if he's an automobile dealer, he possibly wants more touch points than a national like say MG Motors advertising. So we give them a mix of radio, digital and on ground. In very simple terms, that's what it is.
And now you see a battle because let's say auto has traditionally been one of the largest categories for radio, especially auto dealers and local budgets, regional budgets. But today a lot of brands in the auto sector are now starting to spend money through their dealers. In fact, set up centralized systems to run local, hyper-local campaigns for each dealer. Are you seeing a battle for the digital dollar now happening at that level with radio?
It's not a battle. I don't think it is a battle. What they want, they use digital for a different purpose. They use radio for a different purpose. I'll give you an example. If they want to, during Onam in Kerala, a lot of car deliveries take place, like many other festivities across the country. And a particular dealer, or rather a national brand, asked us to go to their dealerships and do some kind of activity there, which is like the Onam mascot landing up there and then giving away the car. Digital can't do that and won't do that. But also just because the radio RJ goes along and this is a trusted voice, recognized influence in the city, that adds a kind of resonance to that kind of campaign over what a digital campaign can do.
Awesome. Let me kind of start to the, like...
And I just want to add a small point to what Manoj said and what Amit said. YouTube is the elephant in the room, right? They have become the platform for music discovery. They've become the music playlists on YouTube is really large, and that revenue is not accounted as audio. When we say, and when you're right in terms of your estimate of what the pure digital audio revenue is, but that excludes YouTube, right?
YouTube is huge.
And this is true across the world. I mean, even in the US, I was looking at some data. Share of your FM and AM is about 30%, but share of revenue is still 60%. So I believe the floodgates will open at some point for digital audio. And so Amit, you stay there, you're doing a great job.
I mean, we do put all our stuff out on audio, but we've just not been able to, like, you'll get like a deal here or there, but it's not enough to like that, for that to run the business.
Sure.
No, and,
you were saying,
to add to that, we've been in the podcasting business for 5 years and we're struggling because programmatic advertising on podcasting is virtually nil. That's where audio companies in the US make money.
True.
Because they're still able to make it on programmatic. We're not able to make it on programmatic, so the only option is to shift to YouTube, right? So it's been, forced on us. We could still have been a podcasting platform living on podcasting, but over the last 5 years we realized it's not going to monetize.
Like Dr. Batra was saying, the two big boys are pretty much controlling every industry. Let me come to a point of, I won't call it reinvention, but I would talk about evolution, right? So you talked about biglife.com. This Sunday I was listening to radio and there was an AI RJ, right? And I'm sure, obviously, each one of you is bringing in tech in some form, not just to streamline operations, but also to create better consumer engagement, right? Asit, let me start with you. Like, what are you all doing in that space?
So, I think in an era where you're talking about consumer time spent of around 8.5 to 9 hours, I don't think any single platform now can cater, especially when we look ourselves as marketing solutions. You just can't be one medium and give that kind of an audience size to the advertisers. So what we have done, our digital journey starts with us chasing the consumer. So for example, we've all heard about influencer marketing and the amount of spends that will happen on influencer marketing. We have created our own influencer marketing platform called as Minco, which at this point in time has got 60,000 aggregated influencers along with our RJs. So we use influencers in our solutions that we give to our advertisers. Because we are a music company and we talk about music, we were the first ones to actually talk about indie music about 14 years back. We've launched a music and artist discovery platform called as Buzzard Disco, wherein an indie artist can distribute his songs in more than 120 countries of the world. And there, as the things pan up, there will be subscription revenues also. Yeah, we were the first ones to actually use artificial AI RJ on air. AI RJ is the first artificial RJ launched on radio station, which is now also present on the virtual world. We are also the first ones to launch a 24/7 streaming platform on the largest digital platform in the country on GeoTV. We are streaming 25, RC Studio is streaming 24/7 on GeoTV. We have last week launched, 10 years later, we have launched a podcast platform called as RC Swapper, where we'll be not only distributing our content, but we'll be also be aggregating content from third-party podcasters. And this again is the tab with Triton, which allows us to distribute podcast content 100 plus countries. So, this is coming from the fact that, if you're chasing the consumer journey, you'll have to be straddling multiple mediums. And in fact, if you're not present, we are not competing with platforms. Honestly, we are collaborating with platforms. Whether it is Spotify, whether it is a streaming platform, we are collaborating with them, and that's the way forward. In fact, we represent some of them, both in the radio world as well as in the digital world. Where I think the world recognizes the fact that radio players understand advertising more than anybody when it comes to local, especially Tier 1, Tier 2 cities. So we are representing some of the larger digital platforms for their revenues in those markets.
Outstanding. Ramesh, if I ask, look, there was a time, and I'm sure it's happening now as well, right, where you started a property as a radio-first property, and then it's actually migrated to becoming digital. Have you guys built anything like that in your network?
For us, it's just the reverse.
Okay.
Every single program of ours, every single hour or content of ours is actually YouTube first. So if you start in the morning, except the morning show and the evening drive time show, every single show is a YouTube show, which we take on radio. We don't do it the other way. We're not a hyper-local radio station. We are YouTube first radio business, which creates YouTube programming and then takes it to radio. So it's all content right through the day, content that people probably want to listen to, interviews, all kinds of huddles, whatever it is that we play on YouTube, which we take on things.
So you're talking about live streaming, right? But
no, so I'm not talking about live streaming. I'm talking about
just recorded and put on YouTube.
Proper YouTube shows. We have our own YouTube channels on which these shows are running. Those shows then go on air in the radio, like a radio show. So it's actually, all content is YouTube first.
Interesting. And Manoj, from your perspective, again, thinking about, given the fact that every region is so unique and there are phenomenal local insights, which is what most advertisers want to leverage. Yeah. And they want to be part of, local festivals in a very, very distinctive way that builds engagement with their consumers. So for your markets, I mean, have you built any property, an IP property that actually is now present not just on radio but also on digital in some form?
No, the radio first properties are couple come to mind. One was called Spotlight, which is essentially, as the name suggests, putting the spotlight on lesser known heroes. And the other is a property called Celebrity Playlist, where celebs talk about their favorite music. Both of them lend themselves beautifully to digital, but I'm very impressed by what they're doing, and that's a lovely thing to do. And the other thing is, all radio stations, I think 5-6 years back, got into video, and they used to shoot radio interviews for video. And now today, it's become video shoots. It's not being shot for radio. So the format of interviewing, the format of questioning has changed. So sorry, I missed your question.
No, so the question was, have you built properties that straddle both radio and digital?
Yeah.
Or something that you're...
I think a lot of the properties that are getting built today and have been built have to straddle 2-3. It has to work on radio, it has to work on digital, it has to work on ground. Top of mind example is a property that's coming up in Onam. It's called Mango Tira. Tira itself means wave. It could also mean screen. It's like a moving concert across Kerala during Onam. So it is supported on radio. It lends itself beautifully to video. And it is fabulous on ground also. So it straddles. That's one example.
Okay. Down to our last 30.
Just to add to that, I do 200 million plus views a month on YouTube alone. A radio station of ours, Nasha, which is a Bombay-based radio station, actually has 100 million views a month on YouTube and is a Bombay-based hyper-local radio station as well. So that's...
Awesome. Look, we've got down to our last 15 seconds, so I'm going to end with just one question. I want every panelist to kind of answer. Let's start with Vanita. So in one sentence, if you were to say, radio will continue to be relevant and grow despite an increasing digital ecosystem, because?
Because radio has always been innovation, and it will continue to break through and innovate in very different collaborative ways.
Ramesh, your take?
I think we have to look 360. That's the only way to survive. there are other things as well. The government has to look at the policy very differently. Radio as an industry very differently. We are probably the most licensed industry in probably the world. 40% of my revenue actually goes to the government as license fee. That's what's probably preventing that next leap.
Okay.
I think the reach of radio has to first increase, which means radio has to be made available on mobile phones first. That reach will exponentially increase, and if that happens, the inherent strengths of radios will amplify, and those trends are it's free, it's local, it's live, and it's real.
I think radio is the most democratic medium, and those who are able to change this democracy into a dynamic digital first company will survive. You know, for us at Radio City, we are not just future ready, we are future defining is what we believe.
Awesome. Amit?
I kind of agree with what Ramesh said. I think, like, honestly, radio is hamstrung by government policy like no other industry in this country. And it even impacts us, right? Because you're unable, like, the ecosystem is not healthy as it could be, and because of that, staffing is harder, people who can work on these things are harder. All that stuff will only improve with a little bit of loosening of the reins.
Abe, final word?
I think the intrinsic strengths of radio are just getting realized, right? The power of storytelling, hyperlocal reach, engagement, and the ability to very easily integrate with all other medium, which no other medium can do as easily as radio. So I think radio will continue to thrive. I think 1890 is when some lord in the House of Lords said radio is dead, and they've been saying that every 30 years, but radio continues to evolve and radio will thrive.
Outstanding. Well, thank you everyone. That's our time, and I hope it was an engaging session. Thank you panelists for a phenomenal discussion. Thank you.